When I saw the red lipstick stain on his white collar, my world didn't shatter. It just went quiet. That's how it began. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with silence. The kind of silence that hums in your ears like a warning. It was a Wednesday morning, one of those sleepy midweek days when you run on autopilot. Coffee, emails, errands. My husband, Daniel, had left early, claiming he had a client meeting out of town. He kissed me on the cheek, said he'd call when he landed, and left the smell of his cologne hanging in the hallway. That crisp cedar scent I'd once found comforting. When I picked up the shirt he'd tossed on the chair, I noticed it immediately. A faint curve of lipstick, just beneath the collar. Red. Not the kind of red that transfers from a hug or an accident. The kind that lingers. I held the shirt in my hands for a long time, staring at that mark. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it felt like a whisper. Look closer. I folded it neatly and placed it back where I'd found it. I told myself not to overthink it. But from that moment, I started hearing everything differently. The way his phone vibrated face down, the long pauses before he answered my questions, the way he said, "I love you," as if checking off a list. Daniel and I had been married for 12 years. We met when we were both too young to know what forever meant. Two ambitious people trying to build something solid. He worked in corporate PR. I ran a small digital marketing business from home. We shared a townhouse in the suburbs, 2 cars, a rescue dog named Milo, and a marriage that looked fine from the outside. But somewhere between board meetings and mortgage payments, we stopped talking. Not arguing, just not talking. We coexisted. His laughter had grown rarer, my patience thinner. We'd become polite roommates, bound by routine. Still, I believed in us. I believed people go through seasons, and that this was just a cold one. I kept telling myself, he's just stressed. I even tried to make things better. Surprise lunches, little notes, his favorite dinners. But his attention always drifted elsewhere, to his phone, his laptop, his so-called business trips. The first time I noticed something was truly off, it wasn't the lipstick. It was his eyes. He'd come home after those trips with a distant look, the kind people wear when they've seen something beautiful they can't confess. One evening, about 2 weeks after the lipstick incident, he came home late. The house was dark except for the dim light from the kitchen. I was sitting at the table with my laptop open, pretending to work.
"Long day?" I asked, keeping my voice casual.
"Yeah,"
he said, tossing his keys into the bowl. "Client dinner ran over. You know how it is." He didn't meet my eyes. "Which client?" I asked, a little too quickly. He paused, just a second too long. Stevens and Rowe?" Funny thing was, I handled some of Stevens and Rowe's digital campaigns. They hadn't had an event in months. I nodded, said nothing. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, kissed my forehead absently, and went upstairs. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at the condensation ring his bottle left on the table, and something inside me hardened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over that pause in my head, the one before he said the client's name. It was small, but it was the kind of pause that lives in lies. The next morning, I decided to stop guessing. I started noticing everything. His suitcases, always packed too perfectly, no creases in the shirts, as if they'd never been worn. His hotel receipts, all conveniently vague. And his emails, always deleted, even the automated confirmations from flights. I began collecting mental notes like puzzle pieces, quietly, carefully. I didn't want to believe he was cheating. I just wanted the truth, whatever it was. One afternoon, I dropped by his office unannounced with lunch, something I used to do when we first married. I told myself it was spontaneous, but really, it was reconnaissance. When I arrived, the receptionist looked surprised. Oh, I thought Daniel was out today. Business trip again? My stomach flipped. He is, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Just left his phone at home. Thought I'd drop it off. I left the building before the receptionist could ask anything else. In the car, my hands trembled against the steering wheel. That was the first time I knew, really knew, something wasn't right. But instead of crying, I felt strangely calm, cold, focused. That night, while Daniel packed another trip, I watched him from the hallway. He folded his shirts like always, humming softly. I wanted to ask him, "Who are you packing for?" But the words wouldn't come. He turned, smiled at me, the same smile that once melted me. "Don't wait up, okay? Flight's early." I nodded. Then, as soon as he left the room, I walked to his laptop. Locked. Password changed. That was when I realized if I wanted the truth, I'd have to find it myself. And that's when the idea began. At first, it was just a thought, a whisper born of hurt and humiliation. What if I stopped waiting for him to confess? What if I made the truth undeniable? That night, after he left for his trip, I stayed up in the glow of my desk lamp, searching, reading, planning. I found an old webcam he'd used for virtual meetings. I tested it. The image was clear. Then I remembered his office had remote access software. We'd set it up during the pandemic for his team. If I could install a discrete live stream on that network, maybe I wouldn't need to confront him at all. Maybe I could just watch. I didn't want revenge, not yet. I just wanted the truth to look me in the eye. So I made my plan. 2 days later, he told me he'd be staying late at the office before catching an early flight. I kissed him goodbye, smiled, and said, "Work hard." Then, an hour after he left, I drove downtown and parked across from his office building. The lights on the third floor, his floor, glowed faintly against the glass. I waited, watched. When the silhouette of a woman crossed the window toward him, I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't prescient, not without sound, not without words, but it was enough to know I wasn't crazy. Still, I needed to see it, to catch it in the open with his own lies playing against him. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to find the truth. I was going to broadcast it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Every tick felt like a reminder of the seconds he was spending with her, whoever she was. The next morning, he returned home, whistling softly, like nothing was wrong. He set his suitcase down in the hallway and called out, "Morning, sweetheart." I forced myself to smile, walking toward him. "Morning. How was the trip?" "Exhausting," he said, stretching dramatically. "Clients in Chicago always want to talk over dinner. My voice is shot." I noticed his tie was missing, a new shirt I hadn't seen before. The faint scent of a floral perfume clung to him. Not my perfume, and definitely not his. "Did you close the deal?" I asked. "Almost," he replied, tossing his jacket over the couch. "Follow up next month." I nodded, careful not to let my hands tremble. "That's great, Daniel. I'm proud of you." He smiled, kissed my forehead, and headed upstairs. I watched him go, my stomach twisting into knots. The calm I'd been holding on to cracked. He was lying to my face, again. For the next few days, I watched him more closely. Not with suspicion, but with a quiet, calculated patience. I noticed his patterns. He always worked late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He muted his phone during dinner. And whenever I walked into the room, he'd turn his laptop slightly away from me. But the cruelest part wasn't the lies. It was how normal he acted through them, as if his version of our life could keep running parallel to mine, never touching. As if he could compartmentalize love, deceit, and marriage like neat little files on his desktop. That was when the anger began to simmer. Not loud, not explosive, just steady. A low flame that would eventually fuel my plan. On Friday morning, I drove downtown, again.
I'd told him I was meeting a client, but really, I had an appointment of my own with a friend of mine named Ava, a tech consultant I'd worked with for years. Ava was sharp, discreet, and had seen her share of digital betrayals. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair as I explained the situation, "you want to know what he's up to. You don't want to confront him yet, and you don't want to do anything illegal." "Exactly," I said, my voice low. "I just want to see the truth."
She nodded thoughtfully. "You said his office has remote software. If you can access that, I can help you set up a hidden live stream feed. Password protected. Only you can see it." I hesitated. "Would that be too much?" Ava looked me in the eye. "Too much would be pretending you don't already know." She was right. I'd spent years being polite, patient, understanding. I'd made excuses for his distance, rationalized his lies. But this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about clarity. "Let's do it," I said. That weekend, I waited until Daniel went to golf with his friends. I logged into his office network using a saved credential from months ago, something he probably didn't even remember existed. The access still worked. Ava guided me through the setup on a video call. We configured the webcam to stream directly to a private link. The view wasn't perfect, but it covered enough: his desk, the office door, and the reflection in the glass wall that faced the conference table. When we finished, Ava looked at me through the screen. "You sure you want this, Maya? Once you see it, you can't unsee it." I took a deep breath. "I'm sure." After she hung up, I stared at the blank live feed window. The office was empty for now, but soon it wouldn't be. On Tuesday, he claimed he'd be staying late again. He left around 6. By 6:30, I was sitting in my home office, laptop open, the live feed glowing softly in the dark. At first, nothing happened. Just Daniel at his desk, typing, checking his phone. He looked so normal, the same man I'd made coffee for that morning. The same man who'd kissed me goodbye and said, "Don't wait up." Then, at 7:12 p.m., the office door opened. A woman stepped in, tall, wearing a navy blazer and a nervous smile. She closed the door behind her. Daniel stood up, walked toward her, and, my breath caught, kissed her. Not a hesitant kiss, a familiar one. I froze. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, but I couldn't move. My body went cold. There it was, the truth, plain as day, framed by the same office walls he'd promised were his sanctuary of hard work. They talked for a while, too softly for the mic to pick up. Then laughter, her laughter, the kind I hadn't heard from him in years. I watched them pour wine from a bottle he kept in his bottom drawer. I watched her sit on his desk while he brushed her hair from her face. It was casual, comfortable, practiced. Something inside me cracked open. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, trembling. Tears fell, but they weren't the sobbing kind. They were silent, the kind that come from disbelief, from the betrayal of something sacred. After a while, I opened the laptop again. I forced myself to watch a few more minutes, not out of masochism, but out of necessity. I needed to burn this truth into memory, so I'd never again doubt what I already knew. Later that night, when he returned home, I pretended to be asleep. He slipped into bed beside me, smelling faintly of her perfume. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady. He sighed softly, reached out, and placed his hand on my waist, the same hand that had just caressed another woman. I lay there, staring into the darkness, making a silent promise to myself. This ends on my terms. The next morning, I drove to the lake, the place where we used to go when we were first married. The water was still, the air thick with morning fog. I sat on a bench holding my coffee cup, watching the ripples. I didn't want revenge out of spite. I wanted justice with dignity. That's when the idea changed. The live stream wasn't just my way of knowing anymore, it could be my way of showing. Because Daniel didn't just cheat on me, he built his entire professional image on trust and transparency. His clients saw him as an honest, reliable man. If I exposed what he truly was,
calmly, truthfully. I wouldn't have to say a single cruel word. The truth would speak for itself. That evening, I logged back into the stream, recorded a clip of the two of them together, and saved it securely. I didn't plan to blast it online or humiliate him for entertainment. That wasn't who I was. But his next big client presentation was coming up, a live virtual event, one he'd invited me to watch, ironically, to see how proud I'd be. And that's when the plan crystallized. If he wanted to live a double life, maybe it was time both halves met in front of everyone. The morning of his big presentation arrived like any other. Daniel was calm, cheerful, maybe even smug. He wore his favorite charcoal suit, the one I'd bought him for his promotion years ago. He hummed while fixing his tie, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. "You'll watch the stream, right?" he asked. "Of course," I said softly. "I wouldn't miss it." He smiled, the kind of smile that used to melt me. Now it just felt practiced. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and left. The door closed behind him with a final, hollow thud. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen. 2 windows were open, one for his official client presentation stream, and another for mine, the hidden feed from his office, the one I'd been quietly archiving for weeks. He thought this was going to be his moment of triumph, a showcase of his authentic leadership and moral integrity. But authenticity isn't something you can fake forever. Ava had helped me prepare everything. I wasn't hacking, leaking, or sabotaging anything directly. I simply set up an automation, one triggered by his own presentation link. At exactly 10 minutes in, when he'd be screen sharing his PowerPoint, the stream would briefly cut to the video clip I'd recorded. Him and the woman in his office, kissing, laughing, pouring wine. Just 10 seconds. No commentary, no narration, just truth. The clock hit 11 a.m. The client meeting began. Dozens of people from different companies joined the live call, some of his biggest accounts, his boss, his colleagues. I saw his confident smile appear on camera. "Good morning, everyone," he began smoothly. "I'm excited to share our vision for next quarter." His voice was steady, charismatic. I'd always admired how easily he commanded attention. It used to make me proud. Now it only reminded me how easily a liar can sound sincere. I took a deep breath. My heart pounded so hard it felt like thunder in my chest. At 11:10, the timer in the corner of my screen reached 0. The switch triggered automatically. The presentation froze for a moment, then flickered. Suddenly, the image changed. Daniel's smiling face was replaced by grainy footage from his office. There he was, leaning in to kiss her. Her laughter, the wine glasses, the intimacy. It lasted only 10 seconds, but the silence that followed felt eternal. Dozens of faces stared, stunned from their little video squares. Some gasped, some turned off their cameras. His boss looked horrified. Then, a black screen. The feed returned to Daniel's PowerPoint. He froze mid-sentence, his expression draining of color. For the first time in years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He fumbled for words. I think there's been some technical issue." No one believed that. He tried to continue, but the meeting disintegrated. One by one, people dropped from the call. His boss stayed silent for a moment, then said coldly, "We'll speak privately, Daniel." The call ended. I closed my laptop. My hands were trembling, not from guilt, from release. The truth was out. That evening, he came home hours later than usual. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie was gone. He looked smaller, like the world had finally taken the shape of his lies and wrapped them around him like a noose. He slammed the door. "What the hell did you do, Maya?" I looked up from the dining table, calm, composed. "I didn't do anything, Daniel. The truth did." "You ruined my career," he shouted. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. "You ruined us long before I ruined your meeting." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "You had no right. No right." I cut in sharply. "No right to what, Daniel? To know who my husband really is? To stop pretending? I gave you years of trust, patience, love, and you gave me lies." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I walked to the mantel and picked up the framed photo from our wedding, the one we'd always kept in the living room. For a moment, I studied it. The smiles, the promises, the illusion. Then I set it down gently on the table. "You can have the house," I said quietly. "I'm leaving tomorrow." He blinked, confused. "You're leaving?" "Yes." I slipped off my wedding ring, placing it next to the frame. "Because I don't need revenge anymore. I have peace, and you have consequences." I packed my bags that night. It didn't feel like running away. It felt like reclaiming something, the part of me that had been dimmed under years of quiet endurance. As I closed the last suitcase, I noticed the faint glow of my phone, a text from Ava. "It's done. HR started an internal review. He won't be able to cover this up." I smiled faintly, not because he was being punished, but because the truth was finally standing on its own, unfiltered. The next morning, I stood by the lake again, the same place where this had all begun. The waters shimmered under the sunrise. I watched the ripples move outward, gentle but unstoppable. That's how the truth works: quiet, patient, and impossible to contain forever. I didn't post the video online. I didn't seek attention or sympathy, but people found out anyway. His coworkers, her husband, even his friends. Not because I told them, but because lies have a way of unraveling themselves once the first thread is pulled. Months passed. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. Started painting again. Started sleeping peacefully. Sometimes I'd see his name pop up in news articles about his company's restructuring. Ethical misconduct, they called it. Other times, I'd get texts from mutual friends. "You were right to walk away." I never replied, because closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from silence, the kind that follows after the storm, when you finally realize you survived it. They say revenge is sweet, but they're wrong. Revenge is loud, messy, fleeting. Truth, though, truth is quiet. It doesn't need to scream or destroy. It just needs to be seen. I didn't ruin him. I just stopped protecting him from what he'd already done. And in doing that, I finally protected myself. It's been a year since that day. A year since the video that wasn't supposed to exist shattered the illusion I'd been living in. A year since I walked out of that house with just 2 suitcases and a heart that felt both broken and reborn. People often ask me if I ever regretted it, pressing that metaphorical send button, letting the truth spill into daylight. And the answer is sometimes. Not because I think I was wrong, but because the truth has its own kind of weight. It doesn't vanish after you release it. It lingers, reshaping everything it touches. For months, I lived quietly. I took long walks by the lake, painted landscapes that looked nothing like the world I'd left behind, and learned how to enjoy silence again. There were nights I cried, not for Daniel, but for the woman I used to be. The one who believed that love could fix anything. The one who thought that loyalty, if given unconditionally, would somehow be returned the same way.
It's a hard truth to accept. Sometimes the person you'd have done everything for wouldn't even choose you if it were easy. I started seeing a therapist. She told me something I've never forgotten. She said, closure isn't something you find in another person's apology. It's something you give yourself when you finally stop asking why. That hit me harder than I expected. For the longest time, I wanted him to explain. I wanted him to look me in the eyes and say, why? Why her? Why the lies? Why all the pretending? But over time, I realized, even if he did, it wouldn't change what he'd done. It wouldn't change how deeply I had allowed myself to disappear inside his version of our life. A few months after the fallout, Daniel tried reaching out. He called, texted, even sent an email that began with, "We need to talk." I didn't answer. But one day, he showed up outside my apartment. He looked thinner, older. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the easy confidence he once carried had turned into a quiet kind of defeat. "I just wanted to see you," he said softly. "I don't want anything." I didn't invite him in, but I listened. He told me he'd lost his job, that the woman had left him soon after everything came out. He'd moved back in with his brother, was trying to start over. When he finally looked up at me, I could tell he expected anger or maybe forgiveness, but all I felt was nothing. Not hate, not love, just a calm, distant understanding that whatever we'd been was over. Not because of what happened, but because of how long it had been broken before I ever noticed. "I hope you find peace, Daniel," I said, and I meant it. He nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't deserve it," he whispered. I didn't answer, because maybe he didn't, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. The hardest part about healing isn't letting go of the person, it's letting go of the story you told yourself about them. I used to replay our wedding vows in my head, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. But those words only matter when both people mean them. What I finally understood is that loyalty shouldn't be a sentence you serve, it should be a choice that brings you joy. Last spring, I took a trip to Italy. Just me, my camera, and a notebook. The air smelled like lemons and salt and freedom. One evening, I sat at a cafe overlooking the Amalfi Coast, sketching the sunset. A woman at the next table smiled at me and said, "You look peaceful." And for the first time in years, I realized she was right. I wasn't pretending anymore. I'd built a small art business online. I taught weekend workshops for women who'd been through heartbreak or betrayal, helping them paint, write, or just find their voice again. We'd sit in a circle, sipping tea, laughing through tears, and I'd always remind them of one thing. You can lose a person and still keep your dignity. You can be hurt and still choose grace. Because dignity, I've learned, is the quiet kind of revenge, the kind that lasts. I don't follow Daniel on social media anymore. I don't check what he's doing or who he's with. That chapter closed itself. But once in a while, I get an email from someone who saw my story shared. Women who write things like, "Your courage gave me mine." And every time I smile, because maybe that's what all of this was really for. Not just to expose a lie, but to help others see the truth in their own lives. One rainy afternoon, I went back to our old house. It had been sold, repainted, remodeled. But as I stood across the street, watching the light spill from its windows, I didn't feel bitterness anymore, only gratitude. That house had held both my pain and my awakening. It had been a prison once. Now it was just a place, and I was finally free of it. As I walked away, the rain began to fall soft, cleansing, steady.
It felt like the sky was washing away the last traces of who I used to be. And I thought to myself, sometimes you don't get the ending you imagined, but if you listen closely, life gives you a new beginning, one that's quieter, stronger, and infinitely more honest. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker like small, persistent stars. I opened my journal and wrote the final words I would ever dedicate to him. You taught me what betrayal feels like, but I taught myself what freedom sounds like. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let the silence cradle me to sleep. Sometimes the truth hurts, but if you let it, it also heals. Would you have done what I did? Would you have let the truth speak for itself? Tell me in the comments, and if my story found a piece of your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more.